you could launch a bottle of water. You need a factory, you need a bottle. How hard could that be?
How hard was it?
Most of our journey is the following. How hard could that be? Wow, this is hard.
Founder and MD of Thankyou, Daniel Flynn.
And please welcome Daniel Flynn.
Daniel Flynn, co-founder of Thankyou. Yeah. Daniel, we're tying together some good business with some good deeds.
Thank you, President Obama.
Your business is extremely innovative. You did a few viral campaigns. How did you come up with those ideas?
It's interesting, it came from a problem. We can't get any major retailer at national scale to buy into us. And the reason why is they would say, in the answer to where the idea come from, it came from trying to solve a problem, but creating space to imagine how it could be solved.
Did you at any point feel imposter syndrome?
In all of us is this wrestle between like, am I good enough? And actually I've resolved an answer to that.
Tell us, how do I get rid of imposter syndrome? You mentioned in an interview before that 2017 was one of the hardest years. How did you overcome that?
President Obama says, Daniel, markets are global now. When are you coming? I'm like, I can't.
No.
This idea should get further. But our foundations weren't strong enough. Man.
Hi guys, quick one. A small favor I want to ask from each and every one of you, if you're enjoying the episode that you're currently watching, is to subscribe to this YouTube channel. It goes a long way in supporting our vision of the podcast, where we want to go, the guests we want to talk to, and your simple gesture of clicking subscribe is the biggest favor you can do for us. So if you could do that right now, that would be awesome. Thank you so much, and back to the episode.
Daniel, in your words, in your own words, what is Thankyou?
Well, Louis, it's good to be here. We are a social enterprise. We sell consumer product like hand body wash, now 70 products that exist all for the end of extreme poverty.
Okay.
The big idea, I think, is combining these two extremes, which is extreme poverty, the 719 million people living in it, and consumerism, the $63 trillion we spend. So I think of us as like a bridge. How do we take the money we're already spending and get it to parts of the world that need it most?
If I was to think about that, what you just described sounds crazy in the best way possible. The goal is so big.
Yeah.
And when I interview people, I'd love to get their early context to understand, what is it about you that's special that makes you do this? A bit of background of this question. I heard your interview with President Barack Obama.
Oh, something.
He's
a good interviewer, no pressure, but he was very good.
No pressure. He asked you two questions, and the first one you sort of just touched on. He asked you, a lot of young people would see videos and things. You were touched enough to take action.
Yeah.
Why? What is it about your upbringing and your context that made you different?
I mean, this is a big question, because the more time I have to reflect, there are many parts of the puzzle. That moment was really interesting because I was moved by emotion. For context, sitting with literal tears streaming down my face because I'm watching stories of kids, they don't have clean water. Their brothers and sisters are dying from the water they collected them. And my mind is thinking, well, if that was me, then my sisters, Jess and Mel, they would have died. It was the water I collected them. How on earth do we live in a world where this exists? Meanwhile, at the time, I'm studying project management and construction. I have big dreams in property development. You're into a bit of that.
Yeah.
I'm hanging around with people that are in business and in property, and they talk about numbers and big numbers, and I know there's money. How do we live in a world so developed, so underdeveloped? And so in that moment, I am moved by what I see. There's this feeling of injustice, which comes from a deep place, and I think in both an upbringing and a whole bunch of stuff which we can unpack, and then also vision. There's an idea which just seemed to connect, which was specifically on the world water crisis. I'm watching stories of, people don't have clean water. I'm reading that 4,500 children die every day from waterborne disease.
That's messed up.
Messed up. But then also I'm reading, we're spending $50 billion on bottled water globally. And there's nothing special about me, but I'm looking at that going, that should serve that. this ridiculous industry that shouldn't exist, at the very least. Shouldn't be making people richer. It should be serving this problem. And so here you have three things. You've got this like
moved
by this sense of compassion. You've got this sense of justice, and this is so wrong.
Yeah.
And you've got this vision of imagine if. Where do those three things come from? I mean, jumping kind of down the next level, I think, it's a journey. I'm really grateful for my upbringing my parents gave me, because I think they gave great perspective on the world.
What did your parents do?
Parents do. Such a good question. I mean, Dad was a lawyer for many years. Mum was a teacher. She picked it up a bit later in life. She was, mum to myself and my sisters, and kind of brought us up, and then went back to uni. I still remember going to uni with her at times, and then she became an amazing teacher. My mum and dad introduced me to faith, which has become such a foundation of my journey.
Yeah.
In fact, at 19, when I'm sitting in front of that computer, where I am in my story is I'm wrestling with this very big question, which is, why am I here? What is my purpose? And so the compassion, the feeling of injustice and the feeling of vision is also this layer of like, why am I here? Why was I made? What's my purpose? What's my calling? What am I here for? And so what made me special, I think it's an interesting question, but framed another way. I think I was asking some very big questions.
Sure.
And I was open.
If I'm a person now and irregardless of age, I'm wondering, what the heck is my purpose? Like, what am I born for? What are some questions I could ask myself to get closer?
Well, first up, it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's a journey. And I think we'll spend our life mining the answer to that. But I think one thing we're not good at doing as a culture is asking questions, because we just jump straight into, well, what's everyone doing? I'll do what everyone's doing. Hustle culture. It's just,
copy the most successful person.
Right, that's the formula. So no one's asking questions. It's essentially like this mimic culture. Who can mimic better and mimic with slight adaptation. But some of these bigger questions, like, why am I here? Why are we here? I don't think we're really talking about that as culture. I don't think we're talking about that as friends. We're probably talking about, like, where do I invest, or how do I get out of the position I'm in, or maybe it's how do I chase a dream. But I think for me, in my teenage years, I went on a journey of wrestling some of these questions of faith, of purpose, and even after this moment, and even after starting Thankyou, I was still discovering it. Why am I really here?
That reflects in your journey, though, Dan, because you found your why, if you will, and then you went on a journey that was unprecedented. Like how you built Thankyou, you didn't copy another social enterprise that came before you. You guys went in and was like, we have no idea what we're doing, so let's figure it out. And you almost invented a playbook that other people are learning from. Maybe tell us a little bit about how Thankyou started.
Okay, so we're sitting there, and I moved, and there's sort of an idea loosely forming, and I start catching up with some friends. My friend Jared, we've known each other since we were 5 years old. I'm telling him about it. He's like, man, that's really interesting, and imagine if you connected that. I tell my girlfriend Justine we've been dating for a month.
Wow.
When we actually registered Thankyou, we've been dating for a month.
Wow.
Super fresh. People are like, that's high risk strategy. And we tell people, it's not high risk. We're in love. Like, what could go wrong? And we are in love. And for those that don't know, we're married now, and it's been an amazing journey. But I started telling friends, and Morgan, another friend, and others, and people genuinely were like, it's kind of strange this doesn't exist. And then began this journey of, well, if you could do it, how would you do it? And I think the way my mind works sometimes is once you see an idea, I find it hard to unsee it. I find it hard to walk away from something.
Sure.
And so that's good and bad some days. But in this particular period of my life, it was a sense of how could you? And then we start to discover, as we Google, as we research, well, you could launch a bottle of water. You need a factory, you need a bottle. How could that be? And most of our journey,
how hard was it?
So most of our journey is the following. How hard could that be? Wow, this is hard. That's the whole journey.
Yeah.
And we just repeat it. And today I think we're still repeating it, just at a way bigger scale. And that's the beautiful, like almost the entrepreneurial naivety, that childlike thinking. And so early on, we learned some things. Initially, I thought you have to have money. You got to have money. You got to
Sure.
have money to make money.
You got to raise capital, get investors.
We all heard that.
Yeah.
The only part of that puzzle to me that didn't fit was I hadn't seen anywhere, and I probably hadn't looked hard enough, but I hadn't seen it scale. A business that existed all for a purpose, not like part for. And I started to like play with ideas like, imagine if 50% of the profit went.
Sure.
That's cool.
All right.
Win, 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 win.
Yeah.
Just to get personal for a second, and I talk a little bit about this in a book chapter 1, but I had this sort of wrestle inside me around what is the model. And I remember a night here in the Docklands in Melbourne, and I was up looking at all the towers that I used to dream of building, to be honest, and actually the super yachts, or they're not, in Docklands, Melbourne, they're kind of yachts. They're not super yachts, but they're nice.
They're boats.
They're big boats.
Big
And I was
boats.
looking at them and I was thinking like, that was the dream and kind of is the dream. But I know that boat's roughly worth $3 million. And at the time, if it cost $20 to get someone access to clean water for a lifetime, that boat could help 150,000 people get clean water, and that little apartment could help 75,000. That building could help millions. And I remember at this moment, just like tears again, just being like, I feel like the money's here, and I feel like it almost cheapens this idea to turn up to the market and say, hey, 50-50, some to me, some to help. And then I kind of went on this journey like 90-10. That could be cool. And then and actually this piece kind of hit me at this idea, which was all, like 100%. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure if that even works, but I'm feeling something right now that I couldn't feel at any other number.
Yeah.
And I look back and go, wow, again on my faith journey and my faith story of what am I meant to do? That night at Docklands, I was convinced, I think I'm meant to do this, and this looks like all for.
100%.
But then with no money, how do you start the thing? And that became the next journey.
What did you do?
I caught up with some
money?
business guys. I told them,
Yeah.
hey, this is how it's going to work. There'll be no shareholders. They're like, but where would you get your money? I'm like, donations. Like, you know, they're like, that's not sustainable. So then we did something and we learned something. And sometimes I think, people often talk about this, money can be a great limiter of innovation.
Sure.
Because when you have money, you can spend it. When you have no money, now you're starting to lean into innovation. You're starting to lean into, well, how could we solve it? And so we had no money, but we thought, well, let's meet a factory. First one didn't go well. About the fifth one shared the vision and he loved it.
Yeah.
And he said, you know what? I think this is a great idea. If you can sell it, then I will produce it for you. And then you pay me the cost of goods when you can, which is a pretty cool kind of thing. They're not really saying, I'll make a product and let it sit there, but it's like, if you can go line up sales, I'll make it.
You sold them on the vision.
Then we landed the largest sales deal in the country for us at the time. So it was the biggest distributor of beverages in Australia that's private, not owned by a big multinational. They work for Red Bull and Lipton iced tea. And we pitched to them in the first meeting. The director says, I'll take 50,000 units from you. How quick can you get it to me? That's his statement. Right? And that we learnt sales can actually help you get the whole thing working.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, sales requires a lot of posture, confidence.
Sure.
And I guess you have the posture and confidence in your vision, but did you at any point feel a bit of imposter syndrome? Like, what the heck are we doing here? Like, are we even allowed to be here? Like, do you feel any of those things?
Honestly, still to this day, I'm like, at what point do the adults step in and say, Daniel, it's over. Like, you just can't, like, imposter syndrome, I think I no longer call it that.
Okay.
Because I think, I resonate with the concept, but I think in all of us is this wrestle between like, am I good enough? Am I enough? Someone else would be, but not me. Or that person is, but not me. And a lot of my life has been a wrestle, and actually I've resolved an answer to that.
Tell us.
Well,
How do I get rid of imposter syndrome?
Man, for me, this is a journey, Louis. I remember you opened with the Obama interview.
Yeah.
So on the flight home from that, I sat down on the plane, and this older gentleman sat next to me. And this is this sort of wise old kind of man, and introduced myself, and turned out he's a psychiatrist and psychologist, or one or the other, in LA.
Sure.
I was like, man, you must have seen some people. How long have you been in the industry? He said 40 years. I'm like, man, you must have seen people. And he just sort of gently nodded. I'm like, would I know them? Like who? And he's like, he shook his head. And I'm like, of course he can't say it. I said, would I, without you saying, would I know them? And he just sort of, he said, yeah, you know, many people would. And then I'm on the plane. I'm like, man, I want some free advice. And I said to him, start talking. I said, you know, it's funny. I think I have a fear of failure. I think I'm afraid to fail. And he's like, that's interesting. And we start talking. And I kind of unpacked. I said, like, I think for me, and I explained, I just come back from this interview. He couldn't believe it. He's like, with President Obama, I'm like, I'm not making this up. Yeah. It's on the internet. Yeah. He's like, that's incredible. I said, yeah, I know it's incredible. Also, we've written a book called Chapter 1. We've had all these successes. I think for me, I'm feeling this pressure and weight of, what if there is no Chapter 2? Or what if I don't have what it takes to get us there? You called it imposter syndrome. Sure. What if I'm not enough? What if I fail? And I said to him, I said, what does it take to not end up in the chair? That was the phrase I used. And a bit later, he said to me, Daniel, it's funny you use that phrase. What does it take not to end up in the chair? He's like, you picture a place of brokenness one day where the kind of, you know, the imposter syndrome sort of all kicks in and you break. He's like, but actually, the truth is you're in the chair right now. It's about how do you open up this conversation? How do you figure out what drives this? And I was like, oh yeah, interesting. Cool. And then it was kind of like, stop talking to me. It was sort of polite. Sure. So we finish. Then I go on a really interesting journey. I think the weight and the pressure was crushing, if I'm honest. I felt it on many fronts. Business, opportunities around the world are opening up like you would. Once you've had an interview with someone like that, the doors that just seem to fly open. And it was like, what do we say yes to? What do we say no to? Yeah. I was having some pretty heavy, weighty thoughts. Not myself, but really at its core, this feeling of I'm not good enough. Just seems like you got to talk to someone. And I remember putting a call through to this counselor. We share the same faith and same values and view set. And I have I'm not the counselor. I don't need a counselor. Louis, this is for people that are broken. I'm not broken. Sure. I crawl into the session. I'm trying to be not be spotted. Incognito. Yeah. I'm like, someone might see me and this is the horrible thing. I go in, sit down, and he asked some really interesting questions. But at the end, he said something. And I think he saw I wasn't coming back. Yeah. And I probably wasn't. I'm like, I'm ticked. You know, yeah. I chat to someone. I'm all good. Yeah. He said, Daniel, I don't think you have a fear of failure. Yeah. I think you have a fear of rejection. Yeah, right. You're afraid of people rejecting you. And I got tears streaming down my face. I'm driving back to work. I cried the whole way, and it wasn't sad tears. It was this sort of relief. I get back to the office. I'm in meetings. My assistant knew about the session. Yeah. She's like, your eyes. We learned not to book this meeting during work hours. And I go on this really interesting journey of, similar to this exact setting, but without cameras and microphones, of someone going, all right, Daniel, have you considered this? Where are you at on this? Where does this come from? And it's funny, man, my name, Daniel, means God is my judge. Now, I never loved that. To me, I'm not sure how anyone else interprets that, but to me, it sounds heavy. Yeah, it's Louis. God is judging you. It seems pretty heavy. Yeah. And I've always been like, oh yeah, cool, my parents call me that. It's funny, I could speak to a room of 10,000 people, or specifically when I remember about 2,000 people. 2 people left early. That night, I did not think about the thousands that stood and clapped at the story and the speech. I thought about the 2 people and why did they leave? Is it what I said, how I said it, what I wore, how I came across? Now, in my mind, this was my normal. It turns out it's not that normal. Yeah. And in this conversation, he said, Daniel, they may have had school run. There's a whole bunch of reasons, right? Needed to go to the toilet. Yeah. But even if they didn't like you for some reason, what does that really matter? And interestingly, Louis, for me, I've gone on this journey of, let me reinterpret my name for a moment. We heard the statement, God is my judge. Here's another way I could put that. With respect, you're not. And the people behind the camera's not. Yes. And that audience isn't. Yeah. So I'm living for an audience of one. I think for me, I've gone on a journey. It's quite an inward journey. It wasn't quick. It wasn't like I saw some reel and I was like, cool, I'm sorted. It was this journey of I'm actually okay being me. That looks like, and that will not be work for everyone. But when I feel a sense of conviction on a vision or a mission or an idea, I will walk forward.
Yeah.
You can critique and criticize, and people do, and they write stuff, and media do things, and it's like, you do you. I know where I'm going, and my judgment, it doesn't sit here.
Yeah.
Prior to that, man, I felt like, oh, I'm not good enough. How's this all going to work? So long answer, deep question, and a journey, man. I think I spend my life trying to realign on this.
From an outsider's point of view, the vision of Thankyou is so beautiful. You're trying to solve a problem that I think everyone can get behind.
Yeah.
I guess sometimes from my point, I'm like, well, surely everyone would get behind that. Surely if we were doing the 7-Eleven campaign, the whole of Australia would make a video and chuck it on their Facebook wall. Surely, it's not hard for me to make a video. It's not hard for me to take part in this movement for such a great cause, yet it doesn't always happen that way. Mm-hmm. That's what bothers me sometimes, and it confuses me too. I think that's why it's so important that you needed to go on that journey of going, okay, some people will reject the vision even though it makes sense, even though it's for a good cause. Maybe not everyone wants to be a part of that, and that's fine. And that doesn't dictate your journey.
Yeah, and you know, man, I still do have moments of like, come on, this should have a higher adoption rate, higher awareness rate. But I do think, at Thankyou, one thing we don't do is we don't put the victim mentality on of like, man, it's so hard out there. If we did that, we'd be crushed. Instead, we're like, okay, we are going to own this. We can market to better. We can innovate better. We can find ways to unlock, hopefully, the wealth that is here to fund it, to really what I think is a darkness in our world, an injustice. People dying. They today do not have access to something that we have, so we've got it at our fingertips. So,
Now, speaking of innovation, your business is extremely innovative. You did a few viral campaigns involving 7-Eleven, and then Coles and Woolworths. Can you tell us a little bit about those campaigns, first of all, for those guys who haven't seen it, but also what was the inspiration behind, how did you come up with those ideas?
So the Coles and Woolworths campaign is a great example, and I think you were recording videos, if I remember, back in the day.
Yes.
In fact, 7-Eleven's beautiful. It was our first breakthrough. Yeah. It was a simple video that invited those that knew about it, so you and others, saying, hey, 2 weeks from today, we're presenting to 7-Eleven Australia. We need your help. Use your voice. Post on their wall, and people sung, dance, rapped, and did that. They saw the groundswell of support. They put it on shelf, and then it sold well. And so then we took it to the next level. Coles and Woolworths was, for context, the Coles and Woolworths campaign was 5 years of them saying no to us. And we tried so hard to get our products in. But after 5 years, we didn't just have our bottle of water. We'd then gone out and developed personal care products and food and a whole bunch of stuff. And so we decided to organize one big pitch and to hit them hard. We launched the video one Wednesday morning. It basically invited our community, which had grown, saying, hey, 2 weeks from today, we're presenting to both of them. Upload a post onto their Facebook wall that if they stock Thankyou products, that you'd buy them.
Sure.
And again, it goes viral. We had 2 helicopter pilots, one here in Melbourne, one in Sydney. They flew up carrying these 20,000 square foot signs. Dear Coles, dear Woolworths, thank you for changing the world. In brackets, if you say yes.
That's crazy.
And then, and that flew around the head offices of Coles, actually. Coles for half an hour, Woolworths for half an hour. And what's beautiful about this story is literally those walls that had stood so strong for so long, for 5 years, they came down. Coles and Woolies said yes. They saw the groundswell. And that's, I mean, in your question of like, well, where did it come from? It's interesting, it came from a problem. And the problem was we can't get any major retailer at national scale to buy into us. And the reason why is they would say, you don't have actually to go back a step, it's a risk to put you on shelf because it might not sell. And how brands remove that risk is they say, well, we understand it might be a risk, but here's our marketing campaign and here's our investment. And so you have brands, even the biggest brands in the country will invest 6 million, maybe 10 million in a launch. We're like, we have no money. Maybe like $30,000. I think we spent about 25 or 30,000 on the campaign for Coles and Woolies. That's it. Not the millions and millions you meant to have. And so we we designed and went on this journey of how do we solve this problem. And in the answer to where the idea come from, it came from trying to solve a problem, but creating space to imagine how it could be solved. And that's hard to do in this sort of busy, sort of like, particularly now, this digital age of like, oh man, I need my dopamine hit. No one says that, but it's just, we're wired. And so I think we've got a challenge, because this sort of stuff, innovation, and it takes time, space, dreaming.
It's so true. I think in every business you get to a point where you don't have the answers, and that's normal. It's a part of it. And then big percentage give up, and then a smaller percentage, like you take that away and go, how can we innovate and create something new to solve this problem, even though no one else has solved it before? These are our limitations, sure, acknowledge them. So with these limitations, what can we build? And that's hugely inspirational, man.
Thanks, man.
In 2014, you became Young Australian of the Year. Thankyou was going great. 7-Eleven, Coles, Woolies, things were going well. And then you mentioned in an interview before that 2017 was one of the hardest years. I mean, I believe it's inevitable that in every business you'll have triumphs, setbacks, victories, defeats. What I think make successful people so unique is their way of handling their failures. What happened in the hardest year of Thankyou, and how did you overcome that?
I mean, there's been many hard years of Thankyou. In fact, those that have tracked the story deep, it's just essentially hard, really hard, like really low, and some mountaintops.
Sure.
But like the ratio of like peak to valley floor is very different. Like peaks are pretty small, valley floors are pretty big. That's often missed.
That's where you live.
I think it's missed on the gram. I think people miss that. Like we see, they're like, whoa. It's like, but how much mountain?
Yeah.
How much valley?
Well, let's normalize that. Let's normalize the valley. Tell us about the valleys, because everyone will go through it.
Everyone will go through it.
We don't publicize it.
Everyone will go through it. So, I talk about 7-Eleven and the win. Amazing. But the 3 years from that 50,000 bottle order to that win was valley, floor, again and again. Like, we launched and we had a product issue on the label, so we had to recall the product.
Yeah.
False start, relaunch.
Yes.
2 retailers looking at us, both say no, both go out with their own brand of water to fund water projects. It's like, that's not fair.
They just copied your idea.
A distributor took us on, went big, went bankrupt, owed us the money. Then another retailer, a big supermarket, said, you're in. Well, yes. Then they said, they reneged on it, but we'd already started producing product. And it was like our first 3 years, I'm like, damn, it's so hard. The breakthrough came, and that's the sort of the most highlighted version. But I think the valleys, they set you up for the climb. Then you start to make your ascent, and there will be peaks. And so, in fact, we had a peak in 2016, phenomenal peak, and that led to the next journey, which was, in my head, I'm like, we'll go peak to peak to peak. Yeah. Turns out,
that's a nice strategy.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that doco? It's Netflix. It's like 14 summits or whatever. Or
I haven't seen it. I've seen it go by my screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got the name of that wrong, which is very embarrassing in this moment. But I remember watching it. He climbs Everest, and then the next day climbs the next mountain. Yeah. He does 11 or 14 or 17 summits. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But when you watch the doco, you see the down. So 2016, the peak was we launched a book. It's in the background there called Chapter 1. 100% of the profit from Chapter 1 funds Chapter 2. It was a crowdfunding campaign. Yeah. Our consumers funding the future went wild.
Amazing.
It was second to the Harry Potter launch week. Right?
That's crazy.
In Australian airport bookstores, but it was big. We raised millions of dollars for our mission. Yeah. It was pay what you want, if you remember that. Some people paid 5 cents. Most papers, 50 grand.
Yes.
A lot of favor, a lot of doors open. And it led to many things. The Obama interview was one in the back of 2017. It led to these conferences. I remember speaking in Germany to 30,000 people from 160 countries.
Wow.
As I spoke, 10 translators are translating. Like, it was just like, whoa. I mean, Japan speaking to some of the biggest retailers in the world at this huge retail convention. And so in one sense, we're going up. But at the same time, we are wrestling with scale. As we scaled, in our hearts and our minds, we were ready. but actually we had a long way to go. And so what we felt is that the business in Australia was getting the speed wobbles. We just launched into New Zealand. It was getting really hard. It was never meant to be this hard. But we faced a new phenomenon. Post that book launch and post the sort of the big wins, all of a sudden, we weren't off the radar. We weren't some little social thing. This was like, when we turn up, we take shelf space.
Yeah.
When we turn up, we take loyalty.
Yeah.
And so we felt a competitor pressure from the big, the medium, and everyone in between in every category we were in water, in personal care, in food, in the baby range, in New Zealand. And so whilst the idea of Thankyou was traveling, and when people, so remember in Scandinavia, in Scandinavia, but in Norway, in Oslo, I just spoke at a conference. I didn't understand the language.
Sure.
I didn't understand the MC, who clearly made jokes about me because they all laughed. Sure. But I remember sharing Thankyou for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And at the end, they stood, they clapped. There were tears from some of their leadership team. It was beautiful. And they came up and they said, we're so looking forward to this being here. And I'm like, yes. But then back home in Australia, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's like, hang on a second. President Obama says, Daniel, markets are global now. When are you coming? I'm like, great question. We're about to launch it in New Zealand. I can't wait to get it further.
Yeah.
And I can't.
No.
This idea should get further. But our foundations weren't strong enough. We wrote a letter once, Better Before Bigger. And we started to understand, wow, what does it look like to get your foundations right? And so these hard years were actually, it was this ripping of like, this vision could and should go here, but our foundations, they cannot sustain it. It's funny, chapter 1, the subline is, you have the power to change stuff.
Yeah.
And you do. But the next question, I think, is do you have the power or strength to sustain stuff? Because anyone can launch.
Sure.
But what about longevity?
Sure.
What about built to last? And so we went on a very deep journey, and I think that's the valley. And that's the moments, how did I stick at it? I mean, I didn't walk it alone. I had people who were asking, how are you doing? I had people outside the bubble of what we were doing saying, hey, this is normal. You think you think this is crazy, this is normal. You thought you were exempt from this, you're not. No leader is, no vision is. There's a fire test for everyone. So yeah.
Do you think you'd be where you are without those years in the valley?
I was saying this the other day to someone. It's like the kind of the age-old, if you could wish away like a season. And that's the crazy part. Like, I would not be who I am. I would not be about to lead where we're going. Spoiler alert, some of the biggest campaigns and ideas we've ever worked on are still to come. But they've come from a very deep place. Not a place of like, everything is awesome, let's just keep going.
Yeah.
They've come from like a sort of a literal going backwards. And I remember, and you know the analogy, the arrow and the bow. And like we all talk about, backwards, so we shot forward. But I can tell you, after years of that feeling, and not just that feeling inside, but also knowing people are looking on being like, oh yeah, how's Thankyou going?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't see it around as much. Oh yeah, how are you doing?
Yeah.
How's Dan going? Gosh.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's a very, very, very uncomfortable process. But every skilled or experienced arrow knows that forward starts backwards. And that is something as humans we resist.
And you have to overcome that narration where everyone else expects, oh, interviewed by Obama, oh, in some of these biggest retailers, oh, you know, you're supposed to go up. That's the societal expectation. And you have to keep moving while you're pulling back, while still balancing expectations from everyone else.
And interestingly, Louis, I think what we had to do, our business still continued, we still gave money, but there was a season for many years, 18, 19, 20, even 17 arguably, where it's like people internally, externally, like, oh, what's happening to Thankyou? What's going on there? 2020, we start to make some steps. And they're bold and they're big, but they actually start to build on now where we're at and where we're about to head internationally. So it's a long game. It's a long journey. And I think one of the, again, a challenge in our culture is just we expect quick growth. The algorithm shows us they're winning, they're winning, they're winning.
Yes.
How hard could it be? But there's a journey.
Now you have a strong group of supporters around you, I'm sure. You mentioned before that in chapter 1, the book, is pay whatever you want. So some people paid 5 cents. But there's a lady called Jane in New South Wales that paid $50,000 for one book. Why do you think she paid $50,000?
I still remember getting the email. And it was obviously like either a misprint or a scam. It just didn't feel right. And we wanted to know like more about her. And it was anonymous. Like we have an email address. We gave account details and the money landed. And it's remarkable. I think there's a part in all of us that wants to contribute to ideas that are bigger than us. We each have different levels of contribution that we can put forward. But I think we want to. And all that Thankyou has done is propose this idea that really requires a little from some and really a little for others, or maybe a bit more from others, but together, culminated together, it could change culture, it could change history, and could most importantly change the lives of one day tens or hundreds of millions of people. And I think we all want to be part of something like that. And so I think Thankyou taps on that. Yeah. It's funny, you know, if we sold one hand wash, we couldn't do anything. But if everyone said, you know what, let's switch, then all of a sudden we can become some of the top givers, or it changes things.
I want to actually show the audience the book because it's here. Now it's not maybe we can get a close up or something. It's not a traditional book in the sense that you read it this way.
Yeah.
Which is people that they see me, they'll be thinking, can this guy read?
Yeah.
Right. This is innovation. Why did you do it this way?
This is an idea that I think is at the essence of Thankyou. Why do things the way they've always been done before? This is threaded through the whole story. I remember we were driving down the Eastern Freeway. Justin and I were talking in the car, and we're just we're talking about the book. And one of the challenges with books is they're hard to stand out. It's hard to cut through. Now, some books do so well. They sell millions of books. So we knew it's a hard market. And so for us, it's about, all right, well, what is every point about this product and how we launch it that's going to help it lead to success? And we're talking about it's so conventional and yet we're unconventional. And this idea came in the car of like, what if we flipped it? And by the end of the car ride, we hadn't even tested it. We were like, yes. Because we were like, man, like imagine in public. Yeah. In public, people are going to be like, what? But then there's a risk. There's a risk based on what you think other people will think about you that you will never read this in public.
Sure.
Because that you could do. This is And so then we're like, this is a big idea because this whole you have the power to change stuff. You can change stuff. You can make ideas and dreams a reality, but the process is uncomfortable. It's as uncomfortable as like looking like the odd one out. It's as uncomfortable as that when you open this, you're like, it feels a bit clunky. Welcome to pioneering. It feels clunky. But as you get into it, you start to get a rhythm. By the end of the book, we had people saying, we think it's better. The speed reading community in Victoria, they're like, we're debating, is it quicker? I was like, yes. It probably isn't, but I love that they're debating it. The book worked. It challenges your thinking. And my favorite part of this is, and I think this is fascinating. People talk about innovation and it can be hard. But I actually think what's more interesting about innovation is it takes courage. Because for us, technically, all we had to do was hit rotate on the print file.
It's true.
That's it. Technically,
true. Yes.
That is all. That's it. The hard part, though, was what will people think? What if it doesn't work? The publisher at the time was working on the projects. Why would you risk such a good story on a gimmick? And I think to the pioneers and to the innovators, you have to be willing, we have to be willing to step out and look odd, look misunderstood. And sometimes, after prolonged being misunderstood, the penny can drop and then becomes the new normal.
I want to just highlight to the audience that all of these things that you've done, in retrospect, some people could describe them as innovation or genius. But before they were launched, I'm just trying to empathize what was going through your mind before launching a book like this, going, but would it work? Before committing, you would post the videos onto YouTube first to get people to come along, but what if no one uploaded videos? What if no one cared? What if no one joined? Like, that's tough. And we all have to go through that, don't we? Of that unsure period of not knowing how something would work out, yet we still have to take that step of faith. And you guys just do it at such a big level, because you try things that are different, that haven't been done before. What goes through your mind the day before the launch of something crazy?
The day before for me usually is actually a fun day.
Okay.
Like the day before, fun or a bit stressful, but it's probably in the weeks leading up to it that, I remember writing a journal entry like, what if no one reads it? What if I'm not a good writer? What if, like, all of these senses of like, I can't, like, what have we done? What are we doing? I think for me, from a personal leadership perspective, none of this stuff's quick. It took 2 years to build that whole idea. Coles and Woolworths, that campaign was about a 2-year build. And that's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a long time to consider. It's actually a long time to work on something. And what you get to do by spending time is you start to think about what are all the risks and how do we manage them?
Yeah.
How do we lower them?
Yeah.
Right? And so you can basically start to think about how do you set this up for success? Now, there's still a good chance it'll fail.
Yeah.
That's the step of faith bit.
Sure.
And for me, this journey has been taking step of faith up a step of faith with a sense of conviction, but not knowing how the story will end. And I think what I've discovered over time is I wonder if there is no such thing as failure. And I was in Dubai a week ago. I met a guy. He coaches some of the biggest companies in the world at a board and a leadership team level. He said, Daniel, I read chapter 1 in 2 days. This is about a week ago.
Yeah.
In 2 days. I loved it, loved the story. He said, you said in chapter 1, fail fast, but I don't believe you believe that. He goes, I when I coach, I don't use the word failure, I use the word feedback. Everything that doesn't go to plan is a feedback point to help prepare you for the next step. We did talk in the book about stumbling blocks being stepping stones to success. But I think it's a really interesting principle, because even if we didn't hit the target that we aim to hit, we're going to get points of feedback to help inform our next step.
Yeah.
It's just that we're willing to look like the crazy ones or the silly ones or the ones that shot for the moon and missed. And to be honest, I mean, most times we aim for the stars, thinking if we miss them, we'll hit the moon.
Yeah.
And in 2020, we launched one of our boldest campaigns yet, and we shot big. I don't know if you want to go there, but this is an example of, did we fail or did we get feedback?
Well, failure is such a absolute term,
Yeah.
isn't it? And it's almost like if you define things as failures, like it's finished, it's over. But feedback is so progressive and encouraging and empowering. I love that. I'm going to use that.
Man, I love that. I feel like we're like co-creating a quote here for like Google somewhere. It's like, failure is not final. I'm sure that it's already been said.
It's somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, Daniel, Thankyou has, until 2022, so you guys started in 2008, until 2022, you've given $18.1 million away to charities around the world.
Yeah.
One of Bill Gates' favorite books is called Numbers Don't Lie. Basically, it talks about certain biases that we have that aren't factual and can be disproven with numbers. For me, ending global poverty, I don't even know what that means in a monetary term.
Yeah.
It just sounds like a idealistic vision rather than a goal, because I can't measure it.
Yeah.
But I've heard you mention that we're closer than we actually may think.
Yeah.
Give us some context with numbers. How close are we actually to achieving this goal?
Well, it's interesting because I think we all feel like this will be here forever. And to give context, technically poverty can always exist, but extreme poverty is a very specific measure. Okay. It's people living on less than $2.15 US a day, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah, and right now, that's at 719 or 16 million people living in it. But if we wind back the clock to the 80s, that was over 2 billion.
Okay.
Go back even further, it was 3 billion. Yeah. And so what we've seen over time is we've seen these massive jumps.
Is that
down.
accounting for inflation over time as well in terms of? Okay.
Good question. I mean, either way.
Right.
But I think what we're seeing a reduction in the end of extreme poverty. It's going down, and actually it was on track, ambitiously on track for a very small number by 2030. But COVID set it backwards. So that's discouraging, I think, for a lot of people working on this.
Sure.
People talk about what is the funding gap, and it's not just a money issue. There is a funding issue, but there's also an implementation challenge around how do we set communities and countries up at a local and a systems level for not just quick change, but long-term transformation. And there are many, many great organizations working in this space. And there are some studies that show the annual sort of numbers we'd need to contribute to see the end of it. And, there's some big numbers in the hundreds of billions, even 1 to 2 trillion. And the source I'm missing, but I know it's on our website right now. What's fascinating to me is it doesn't matter when I look at any of those numbers. If I zoom out to the 63 trillion, and there's an updated number now, $69 trillion of consumer spending, I'm like, okay, so yes, there's a gap, but we're on our way down, and spending's going up, and that's all of us, and that is what it is. How do we take as much of that as we can?
And the best thing is we're spending on this stuff already anyway.
Yeah.
So we're not going out of our way to give money we don't have to a charity. We're spending money on things that we're already buying, except if we buy it here, this can go literally change a life.
But numbers don't lie, which is a fascinating kind of concept. And when I look at that number, 18.1 million, it's about to go up. But when I look at that number, I think a few things. I'm proud of the work we've done. I'm proud of the foundation that's been set. I've seen the impact firsthand and then secondhand through our partners, and it is truly remarkable. But it is a scratch, but a breath of what should be to come.
Sure.
In the potential of this idea. And so my wrestle is looking at numbers like that, looking at the gap, and then asking these questions, well, how could we solve it? And what would it look like to take it to scale? And this is the problem we're looking to solve. And
now you're trying to solve a problem that's huge. Can't think of a better term. It's big. And you're almost carrying the weight of the kids without water, the parents who don't have the resources to sanitation to look after their kids. You're carrying that weight for all these years. What's the personal cost been on yourself?
It's interesting, the net benefit, has actually been phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think for me, my perspective has shifted radically.
Yeah.
Radically shifted from 18-year-old me, 19-year-old me, and I think 35 now. I'm growing, it's getting older. It's been a beautiful journey, and I think now, what has the cost been? I mean, I can point to some things. Like when I see friends who started companies at similar times and then they exit, they sell their company for 100 million, 400 million, or maybe even more. I'm like, yeah.
That's nice.
I mean, because what's hard to understand in building and pioneering is it is a 24/7, I mean, plus sleep, plus we take a good day off a week, but it is a lot. It is a lot, and there's a lot you push. But I think for us over time, that push is for purpose, not for profit, although we use our profit for our purpose, but it's the reward in all of it.
Yeah.
That sense of I don't wake up asking, why am I here? I don't wake up wrestling some of those questions I did at 19. And that incredible peace I get to walk in, to me, I actually don't feel the weight of the numbers. I just sort of feel the curiosity.
That's
and
amazing.
This invitation to dream about how can we get there. And there's a few little things, like I mentioned, that feel like a cost at times. But overall, it's an absolute net positive. It's an honor. In fact, writing the book, by the time I finished it, I was like, man, what an honor it has been to be part of this. And I reckon if I do my job right, and if Justine and if each of us as a team, if we do our job right, one day we will not be the ones writing next chapters of this book. This will go to others. This has to go beyond us. So yeah, the cost, the honor, these are kind of intrinsically linked ideas.
That's a lens. That's a lens that you see your experience through, because it's so easy for someone else to see all of this as a cost and as detrimental to themselves, but you don't. It reminds me of something I read recently. I can't remember where it's from. It talks about the idea of stress. It says that people who go through a stressful life and perceive that stress as being detrimental to them will live shorter lives. People who don't go through stressful lives, they'll live longer. But the group that live the longest are people that goes through stressful lives but perceives that stress as being progressive and positive.
Wow.
That's amazing. It's the same experience, but it's the lens that you see it through, right? I'm inspired.
Man, I can see that.
I asked some people from the Thankyou team
Oh,
some questions,
here we go.
and
Investigative journalism.
I
love it.
told them not to tell you. So I don't know if
Success. I do not know, Louis.
but I can't go through all of it. But they just had so much to say about you. I asked them, what do you feel or have to say about Dan's leadership? It's not easy leading a team through such a big cause, through all the valleys that you mentioned as well. And some of the things that they said was Dan's leadership of Thankyou has changed the way I see good leadership forever! ! I don't know who they're from, just people in the team.
Send me later.
Dan fosters a high trust environment that allows people to take risks and run at pace without fearing failure. Big vision, big heart, lots of trust. I love his perseverance and a never give up attitude. I wanted to work here because the mission is critical and the culture is second to none. Dan balances out heart with leadership incredibly well. The way he looks after his team while still making sure Thankyou is steered in the right direction is a pleasure to behold and be a part of. I just thought it would be nice for you to hear some of these things from your team.
It's very kind. It's very kind. And Thankyou's gone on many iterations of the journey. And I think that's very, very kind. In fact, I could give you, Louis, email of heaps of people that have been on the journey, and they'd maybe say similar, maybe some would say some, other things too, because when I look at the journey, there's been some ups and some downs, and as much as it's been about a Thankyou journey, I think for me it's been a leadership journey and a journey of growing up. I look back at some of the years, I'm like, man, I would think I was humble, but I don't know if I was humble. I would think I'm caring, but was I really? And I think I've grown.
Sure.
And if this is a reflection of now, even a hint of that, that's a beautiful thing. And it's very.
That was just from your retreat, about yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
very recent.
Wow.
Very recent.
Wow. Yeah. We're in a really special place as a team and a culture. It's been a journey to get there, and we're very grateful for everyone who's helped build it.
Yeah.
There's been some hard years, but it's cool to hear.
Well, Dan, we have a ending tradition on this podcast where the previous guest leaves some advice for the next guest.
Okay.
And the piece of advice that I have here, wow, it's a paragraph. I haven't actually read this yet. When you embark on the seemingly never-ending journey of life, don't forget that it is the little steps that, through patience and consistency, accumulate to the ultimate destination. When going through challenges and obstacles, don't fear, as God is in the driver's seat. Live for something greater than yourself to achieve the success and fulfillment, because by doing this, you will be rewarded. I feel like you've lived this since starting Thankyou, haven't you?
Well, thank you. But there's a lot in that quote, and that idea of consistency is a challenge to all of us, because we can launch ideas, we can take bold steps, but I think it's after the bold steps, it's the steps that follow. That's the stuff that no one sees.
Yeah.
There's a lot in that. It's cool.
Yeah. Well, Dan, thanks for coming along today and shedding just a little bit of light on the journey of Thankyou, and I'm sure there's plenty more to come. And for anyone who wants to, chapter 1, is available. Pay what you want. 50,000 is the current record.
Louis,
but
you could beat that
you can-
here right now. I'm just kidding. I'm
That's
kidding.
right. We
I'm
can
kidding.
break that record. Also, Thankyou products on the shelves. Going into Asia soon.
Yeah,
as well.
watch this space. Middle East,
Yeah.
Asia, Europe. It's
Watch
exciting times
this
ahead.
space. Awesome. Thank you so much, brother. Bless you.